Hello my friends, it's Ranger Russ from the Meigs Nature Center. I'm coming to you from Campers Beach today at Hammonasset. It is a bit windy, so hopefully the camera will stay stable enough for me to do this program and the wind won't be too loud in the microphone. But before I get started, let me just let everybody know that the Meigs Nature Center is currently closed. However, we will continue to do these Facebook live presentations. And as soon as we get 1,000 followers on YouTube, I'll start to do YouTube live presentations as well. So these presentations happen from Tuesday to Friday at 11 o'clock. So today's program's really special and it's very different. It's very different for me. This is the first time that I've done a sand study in a place that's been renourished. So what we're talking about today is beach renourishment, and we're also going to talk about the grains of sand and what those grains of sand can tell you. As I go, I'm hoping that the microphones are working. It is tough with this wind, so if it's not working, I can try and disconnect and we'll see if that works a little bit better. I'm going to ask everyone to continue to post where you're from with your questions and comments. I appreciate that. And let's get started. So in order to do a beach grain study, the first thing you need is a magnifying glass. These are really helpful. Sometimes if you have a smaller jeweler's loupe, they can get more magnification. That's good as well. I've got my marking stakes. So these you put out in your different locations, equally spaced apart, so that you get a proper scientific study. You need to have measurement and precision for a good scientific study. You also need, for a good scientific study, a measuring cup, so that you make sure that you're testing the same amount of sand at each location. And then we've got our sifters. So these sifters have different size openings. Okay, I only brought 4 of the different openings. There are actually a few more, but they get really fine, and we don't need to be that precise today. Okay, and then I also got this little guide to grains of sand. Okay, so this has just little examples of the different sizes of the grains and the sphericity. Sphericity just means how much a grain of sand is a perfect size, a perfect geometric shape. So if you think about, let's take a basic shape of a square. That is a very geometric shape. If your grain of sand is close to a square, it's going to have a high sphericity. If it's almost round, it's going to have a very low. That tells you actually quite a bit about the sand. So let's start with that. So I'm just going to take a small handful of sand, okay, and I'm going to use my magnifying glass, and we're going to look at the shapes of the sand. Are the sand particles very round, or are they very angular? Are they very geometric in shape? And this sand looks to me to be, it is a mix, but it looks like a lot more round than geometric. So I'm going to look on my guide here, and I'm going to say we are probably close to, I'm going to say wow, it's looking like it's right about the middle. So right in the middle of our graph here, that's where we are. Okay? Now, something else you can tell just by looking at the sand, and it's by looking at the colors of the sand. When you look at the color of sand, so you're going to want to look, you're going to need to look closely, because you can't just say, oh, sand is one color. When you look closely, are the grains of sand different colors, or are they all the same color? And the more they are the same color, the higher the likelihood is that that sand is from that location. The more mix of colors there are, the more likelihood is that those grains of sand came from many different locations. Okay? So I'm looking at this, and this is very obvious. This is 50-50. There's some really light grains, there's some black grains. It all ends up looking sort of gray, but because there's a very big mix of color in this. Now, I have sort of an inside information, and I know that the sand here at Campers Beach was brought in a beach renourishment project just a couple of years ago. And it came from the Housatonic River runoff, okay? Which means that this sand washed down the Housatonic, built up in a sandbar, then was dredged up and transported here, which is why we have lots of different colors of sand here at this beach. Now again, if you look, I'm going to flip the camera so you can look at the beach. And if you look closely, now if you look at that beach, does that look like it's a whole bunch of different colors? Probably not. You're looking at a mix of colors, and when you mix colors, you get a mix. You get one color, okay? So this, what looks like a gray beach, is actually a lot of very light colored and a lot of black sand in there as well. So that tells us that this sand isn't generated right here. So there are different ways that sand is generated, but generally sand comes from a large stone being worn down over time, being weathered, and ground into small granules of sand. That sand can be washed out to sea, and then in some places the currents and tides will push the sand back up and form a beach. If the sand is ground off of the bedrock that's right there, and if you remember that last picture I just showed you, there's no bedrock, there's no rock ledges here that can form sand. Now, when you do a sand particle study, so this is the next part of this, we're going to do, let's do 200 millimeters. Oh, it's kind of wet. We need some dry sand here. Drier sand is better because it will pass through the sifter a little bit better. A little bit more. Okay. So now we pour it into the top. Let's see if you guys can see this. We angle it down. Okay, so we've got our sifters. We take our sand and pour it in. Now, this is the fun part. Everybody did this when they were a kid, right? Now, once the sand is sifted away on the top, that doesn't mean that it's finished going all the way down. So you have to keep on sifting. Okay. All right, so this top one is good. We can take a look at the highest level of the sand. And I don't know if you guys can see that there. It looks like there's a lot of shell here, okay? So here's another good point. Sand is not always made of ground up minerals and rocks. It could be sand. It can also sometimes be volcanic. So, or I mean sometimes shells and sometimes volcanic. Some beaches, I visited beaches in Florida that practically the whole beach is just ground up shell when you look at it. So our first layer, that's just shell. I see nothing but shell in here. Okay, not even a single pebble. Okay, so we're gonna put this to the side. Now normally we would measure that. We're gonna move on to our next one. And again, here we have a lot of shell. There's a lot of shells there, but there are some little pebbles in here. So we're getting a few more pebbles as we get further down. So let's move on here. Now this is where the fact that it's wet is a bit difficult, because these finer sifters have a harder time with the wet. So I'm going to use my fingers and try and make sure it all gets sifted out here. Okay, we're sifting. One of the things I always enjoyed was, as a child, was sifting my play sand in my sandbox. Okay, so now we've got, this is what I believe most of our beach is going to be made up with. It's not a really fine sand, but if we look closely, I am seeing a bit of organic material in here. There's some ground up seaweed, and then what looks like some black, but it's kind of soft. So that might be like a sediment from the river that this came from. Now we move to the next level, and this is definitely, there's not as much sand here as the last one. There are some very fine, soft grains of sand here. It's really cool. Now, if I were doing a study, I wouldn't be doing this because the wind is blowing it around. We really need to measure and see out of the 200 mil there that we measured how much of it is fine grain and coarser as you go up. And then finally, the last little bit, there is a little bit in the bottom of super fine, super fine sand. But very, very little. So this beach is mostly made up of this mid-range. This is right in the middle of the grains. It's still sifting out a little bit too. So when sand is washed out, when all the sediment is washed out from a river, the finer particles are deposited further out. The larger particles are actually carried by the waves and get deposited higher up on a beach. So typically when you arrive on a beach, and again, this beach has only been here for a short time, a couple of years, so this sifting effect hasn't fully happened yet. But you'll get the larger grains of sand further up, and the finer grains the farther out you get, and then the really fine stuff is way out in the sea, and you usually don't even see that. Maybe it might make a sandbar or something. Okay? Now, it's really bright out here, but I'm going to try and look and see what the comments are. Looks like my cousin Brad is on here, and I'm having a really hard time reading it. I see the word play. So I think he's talking about playing in the sand. Let's see, any other questions or comments? Jack Miller is watching. Rob Skiles. Hello, guys. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet. And I am having a really hard time reading the screen. There is quite a glare out here today. So I'm going to keep on going, and we'll talk more about the sand. So, another thing that happens on a beach, there is stronger wave action in the winter. Not just from our storms, but you get heavier winds, and winds create bigger waves, which means that more sand is going to get dragged out to sea. That heavy wave action grabs the sand and pulls it out. It can grab bigger particles of sand, and it tends to pull the beach away. There's a softer, lighter wave action in the summertime. This is actually heavy wave action for Hammonasset in the summer. This is probably pretty typical in the winter. but that lighter wave action pushes sand back up. So sand goes in and out naturally as the seasons change. Another thing that changes are the prevailing winds. Typically in the winter, the winds are blowing to the east here at our beach. They're all going this way. Today, it's coming pretty much straight on. And then in the summer, it tends to come out of the east a little bit more, pushing to the west, which means the sand gets pushed this direction to the east in the wintertime, and then it comes back this direction in the summertime. So, and again, it's less action in the summer, so more sand ends up going east than coming back in this direction. So you get a lot of natural sand movement. Now we're going to pan over and show you, behind me is the camper's jetty. So we have a jetty down at Meigs Beach and a jetty over here. These are man-made jetties. Those were not put out as fishing piers, although most people really enjoy them as a place to go fishing. Those were put in to try and control the movement of the sand. So they put this one up so the sand wouldn't go in that direction. They put the other one up, the sand wouldn't go in that direction. It would just move back and forth between the two. Sounds good, right? But think about this. What happens if you're on the other side of that jetty and the other side of the prevailing winds? So if you're on the east side of a jetty, your sand is getting pushed to the east and you're not getting any more sand from the west because there's a jetty blocking it. So what do you have to do? You would have to build a jetty to contain the beach sand. What happens to your neighbor to the east of you? They would have to build a jetty. And this actually occurred on Long Island. They were having issues. Every beach needed a jetty to capture sand because it was going away and not returning. So they actually passed an ordinance that you couldn't put any new jetties in, and if your jetty became too old, you had to take it out to try and reduce the number of jetties. But naturally, sand needs to move back and forth. And I hope you guys are not getting shaken up too much. I'm looking at this camera and the wind is blowing it quite a bit. I'm trying to read these comments. Hello, Ibby. I think Ibby's from New York, or we're at New York right now. Let's see. I saw Michigan earlier. Wallingford. Here's Madison. Dredge sand from the water back onto the beach. Do you ever, I finally got one question that I could read. Do we ever dredge sand and put it back on the beach? So this has happened a few times in the history of Hammonasset. There was one point that they dredged, and this is going back to the 50s. They dredged Long Island Sound right off the beach here and dumped it into the salt marsh to create parking lots. This was done for two reasons. One, they needed more parking, and two, it was a very long, gradual beach. They said that you could walk a half a mile out and still only be up to your waist at low tide. And they felt that that was becoming a hazard, a risk, because people were getting too far out and lifeguards wouldn't be able to get out there and rescue them in time. So by dredging the beach away, you're changing the shape, it gets steeper faster. Now, if we think about this logically, that changes the entire dynamic of beach sand movement. When you have a steeper beach, the sand is going to go downhill, right? And actually, the steeper your beach, the more gradient, more difference you have between the fine grains at the bottom and the coarse grains at the top. So the more gradual the beach, it'll be a much more gradual change. The sifting will show that. So what they did, they changed the shape of the beach, and then we found that the beach sand was going down, filling in that hole and not coming back up. Not really a hole, it was pitched. But that does create more of a problem than people realized at the time. So, okay. So again, the jetties are there to try and control the movement of the sand. Unfortunately, it's just like anything. When we try and control Mother Nature, there are always consequences. And you may not realize the consequences at the time, but over time we've realized the jetties are not as good for our beaches as we thought they were. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions. I'm going to try and do this sifting. The sand down close to the water is really wet, but we're going to try it anyway. And I just noticed something right behind me over here. Can you guys see this gull? It's a immature, herring gull. I'm not even sure if you can see it because I can't see anything when I angle the camera this way. Just hunkered down right here. I don't know when it came up and decided that this was where it was going to lay down, but when I got here it wasn't there. And you can tell it's a juvenile. It takes them about 4 to 5 years to get the white with the gray wings. So this one is pretty brown, so I'm going to say it's pretty young, probably only a year or two old. And hopefully it's not injured. It seems to be content just chilling out there on the beach. All right. So I really think I need to get a camera that shows up better in this glare. It's really hard to read. Okay, so I'm gonna dump our sand here, and we're gonna see if we can do this in another spot and see if we can get a different gradient, different differences between the sand grains. Somebody saw the sand, I can see that. It just clouded over here. We do expect some a little bit of storms this afternoon, so it is starting to cloud up a bit. All right, where are we gonna go to do this next? Let's go closer to the shore. Now, wet sand doesn't work very well through the sifter, but let's just try. It looks like there's a bit of softer spot here. I see a comment here. My friend Liz and I love your shows, very informative. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to try and get as dry a sand as I can from this spot. And we're getting the same measurement. There we go, and it's important to remember, got a little too much there, if we were doing this as a scientific study, our scoop would be very important. You'd have to scoop the exact same depth each time. So it makes a big difference when we're doing this as a scientific versus, let's just see what the difference would be. So we're about, 15 feet further down the beach. Wow. This top layer sifted out in a hurry. There is not a lot of large particles here. Now you could tell that a little bit just by looking, but this is surprising. There's almost nothing in our first tray already. So we're gonna move down to our next tray. Wow, it's sifting better than I thought considering how wet it is. And again, that first tray, just shells. Oh wait, there might be a little pebble here. Let's see, is this a pebble? Yep. A little pebble. It's really cool too. All right, this is where I get distracted. I found this little tiny pebble. It's very small, but you can see it's black and white, and it looks like granite. So there's an important thing. I mentioned some of the other things besides minerals that sand can be made of. Shells, corals sometimes, which coral and a shell are really similar. They're both exoskeleton. Lava. But the main thing that sand is made of are quartz. By far, that's the most sand in the world is made of quartz. And then after that would be feldspar. And quartz and feldspar are found together a lot of times in rocks. So our next layer, there's not a whole lot in it, but again, mostly shells, a few little pebbles here and there. So let's go on to our next one. And again, this one is tough. We're getting a really fine mesh here, so it's hard to get it through. And up above, this was the layer that had the most sand in it. And it looks like we might have a lot again. So I want to let everybody know this Friday at 6:30, we're going to be doing a special program on possums. Our friends from Ferncroft will be on, and we did a test on last Friday trying to get it to work. Didn't quite work on Facebook. We will probably be doing this program on YouTube. So hopefully everybody can sign up for YouTube really quickly and subscribe to my YouTube channel, because when I get 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, I will be able to do YouTube live programs instead of just Facebook Live. But I'm really excited about possums. They have a possum, I think she called it a dwarf possum. It's a really tiny, sort of like the runt of the litter. And it is the cutest possum. You can visit Ferncroft. They've done some educational programs, so you can go on and visit them. So another thing to keep in mind, there are other state facilities that are doing educational programs. The Dinosaur State Park has been doing a lot. Goodwin Conservation Center, Kellogg Environmental Center. We've got No Child Left Inside. We've got the Great Park Pursuit. We've got Sky's the Limit. And actually, I was at a Sky's the Limit location last Friday when I visited Haley Farm. I visited Canopy Rock, and that is on the Sky's the Limit walk. Okay, so this is pretty wet. It's still sifting through. I think if I left it out in the sun a little bit and let it dry. But this mid-range, there's a lot of sand in here. And it's the same as the sand up above. I think the difference is there's different quantities. And now we're going to move down to the next layer, which again is still sifting through a bit. But there is a lot more at this level than there was up above. These two, I would say, are almost equal, or maybe this one's even more. Okay, and then the finest one, again, very, very small amount. So there's not a lot of this fine grain sand here at Hammonasset. But if we were doing the study, we would take and measure this. You'd be able to compare it. Okay, so that's almost half of our sand was our finest mesh. Versus up there, I would have said it was reversed. Half the sand would have been the next one up, which we have, there's about 50. So still quite a bit. Actually, I'd say even closer to 75. All right, let's take a second, see if we've got any questions. Looks like people are excited about the possums. I'm excited too. Can't wait to see the possums. Saw a seal over in Saybrook over the weekend. Do you ever see any here? We definitely see seals here occasionally in the summertime, but they're going to be out in the water. But in the wintertime, usually end of October through March, out on the Meigs end typically, but they'll come up in other places. On the rocks at low tide, we see seals almost every low tide during that time. So you can definitely see seals here at Hammonasset. So if we look here, our grains of sand, the finest grain is considered silt. And like I mentioned before, silt usually ends up out to sea, doesn't wash up, and you're not really going to see it washing up on the beach. And then very fine and fine sand, I would say that this section of it, it's all, I would say this is fine sand, not quite very fine. And then the last layer, this was our very fine sand. And then coarse. I would say this one here would be coarse, not quartz. And then these upper ones, which it's not even sand, it's just shells, or not minerals, but shells. This is not even on our chart because it's really, really coarse. And very coarse sand isn't even on, this wouldn't even fall into because it's bigger than that. All right. So, I hope you all enjoyed this program about sand. I find every aspect of nature interesting, and this to me is part of our natural world, the sand. Many people love to come to Hammonasset. You love to walk on the beach, and hopefully you learned a little bit about the sand that you're walking on. I will continue to do these programs Tuesday through Friday at 11 o'clock. This coming Friday at 6:30 is our last of our Friday evening lectures for the summer. But coming up in October, you can look for a new lecture series, some Native American experiences. That will be Saturday mornings. So keep an eye out for that one. We'll be doing those live as well, probably the same that we're going to do this Friday's program. So it's probably going to be YouTube Live. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like us and follow us on Facebook. Tell your friends about it. Tell your teachers about it, because we already have some schools that are putting these videos into their curriculum. We're going to be trying to fix up some of the videos that had some connection issues, and all of that should be coming. So please enjoy the rest of your day. It's a beautiful day right here. Watch out for those thunderstorms this afternoon. I always love a thunderstorm, so I'm going to be looking out for that. And until tomorrow at 11, this is Ranger Russ signing off from the Meigs Point Nature Center at Hammonasset Beach State Park.